Today on The Real Story, school is back in session and there's a lot of work to do. Kids and teachers adjusting to being back in person. Districts working to make up lost ground for their students while also still navigating COVID. This morning, we check in with Hartford School Superintendent Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez to see how students and teachers are faring so far this year. Plus, booster shots now going into arms in Connecticut. We break down last week's CDC approval, who's eligible, and how much of a difference could it make. We continue our discussion on COVID with Dr. Albert Coe from Yale's School of Public Health. He joined us last week, and our questions aren't done. Part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Coe ahead. It's all today on The Real Story. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jen Bernstein. Hartford Public Schools are back in session in person. There's a lot of excitement for kids and teachers, many glad to be back face-to-face to learn and teach. But there is no shortage of challenges, or are no shortage of challenges for district leaders as they try to make up for lost ground from last year when classes were virtual. The school district dealing with problems like absenteeism and the mental health impacts from the pandemic. Not only that, but we're still navigating COVID. Joining us this morning to talk about all of this is Hartford Superintendent Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez. Thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
So we know that last year was incredibly challenging for all of you and for kids. So we're back, we're in person. How is everyone faring so far?
So this is actually the 4th week of school for us, and we did start with excitement, hope, and a little apprehension, to be completely transparent, because it is the 3rd year that we're operating within a pandemic context. So yeah, challenging for all of us, but at the same time, the opportunity to get back, assess the true impact of the pandemic on students, and support not only them, but also our staff.
You know, last year, we know, was difficult. Navigating the pandemic, trying to do virtual learning, and we know that COVID exacerbated some of the already existing challenges that students in Hartford have. So how is that going so far this year? What do you think is the biggest challenge that you're noticing as you're adjusting and trying to make plans in person?
So several challenges. And first, I want to clarify that I really don't think that we'll know that the exact impact that the pandemic had on students just yet. We know, for example, that it has impacted chronic absenteeism. We know that our graduation rate, we know that students needed additional time, and so that some of them could not graduate on time. We know that the social, emotional, wellness, mental health of our students also needs attention. But we know that we won't really know yet, right, as students continue to progress through their developmental stages. What we know so far is that some of our students were not coming to school on the first day or second day, the first week, which required us to really hone in and reach out to families, not only by phone calls. We've made more than 18,000 phone calls since the beginning of the school year. But again, going back to doing our home visits, over 700 home visits, we realized that the beginning of the school year, we had 2,600 students that were considered no-show students. We did not know where they were. They were not responsive. We're now down to about 280 of those students. And so we knew that then and there was apprehension and other needs and supports that our students and our families had.
That's a lot of work to go from 2,600 to 280, and you did that in the last 4 weeks?
Correct. And so now the challenge becomes, right, keeping our students engaged and supporting not only them, but our teachers, because we know that, our teachers are also coming back to having all of our students. Some of our students left, we left off with them in the spring of 2020, and some of them went from middle schoolers to high schoolers for the first time without that in-person, peer-to-peer opportunity to learn from one another. And so lots of different learning, lots of new routines that we're going to have to step back and slowly support all of our students and teachers in getting to that foundation setting that is needed for the next level of learning.
And as we've said, there's no shortage of challenges that you're facing here. I want to talk about, do you have the resources? I want to start, though, with teacher staffing shortages. What's going on in the school district right now?
Yes, so the staffing shortage is a significant challenge for us. And there's not one conversation, probably 2 to 3 times a week that I have the conversation with local colleagues, superintendents across the country. And there was a teacher shortage before COVID. It was local and it was national. And of course, that has deepened. And so for us, we do have vacancies. However, we do have long-term substitutes. We have actually placed 94 student teachers for this year. So while we're trying to make sure that every single day we have coverage and support, we still know that we have a long ways to go. And in critical positions, all of our vacancies are critical. But when you think about special education, our support staff, that is a key area of need. We also have a deeper need around bilingual teachers. We have our math and science teachers that we need. And so it is a challenge. We work closely with our higher education partners, and we continue to monitor it every single day. We're out there trying to source candidates on a weekly basis.
Do you have the resources you need in terms of funding? We know that there was a large amount of money, federal money, for COVID relief, and that Hartford school districts getting, a decent portion of that. So where is that money going, and could you use more? I mean, I guess you could always use more, but when you assess the need right now, where are we?
Yeah, so the funding, I want to say that it is what is really helping us. So in addition to identifying close to 200 positions, and the majority of those being directly going to the classroom, social workers, teachers to support with class size reduction. We're being very mindful and intentional about where we focus the support. And so we're focusing on key transition grades and key grades. So kinder through 3rd grade, reducing class size in schools that have a higher level of need. And the same thing at the 9th and 10th grade. Lots of support for extended day and extended year opportunities for students, like an expanded summer program, intercession learning opportunities, weekend, Saturday academies for our students. So the funding, the supports are in place. It's just now, we just talked about the staff shortage. So even though we have the funding, we have to find the staff. The other piece that I have to think about is, 2.5, 3 years from now, right, when the funding is no longer available, that means that right now we have to think about what are we putting in place that we can sustain when the funding is not here. And so to that, there is a focus for us around building, supporting the capacity of our educators. For example, around the science of reading. So all of our K through 3rd grade teachers, close to 400 teachers are getting a 2-year support training around the science of reading, because we know that if the funding will dry up, we still have that capacity that we can continue to leverage in years to come.
That's really smart. Train your staff so that you can keep that going when the COVID funding does run out. I read that you hired more social workers because of the mental health impact that we're seeing. How are kids doing in that way, and what made you assess that and feel like you needed to bring in more social workers?
Yeah, so the move to identify the social, emotional learning, wellness, mental health supports came actually early in the spring. That was probably one of the first moves that we did, because we know that oftentimes, trauma manifests behaviorally. It manifests differently for different people, but when we know that students can manifest behaviorally, we know that we need additional support. And so through social workers, through also partnerships, we have great partnerships with some of our community providers. For example, the Village for Children and Families, they are in our schools throughout the day, supporting students and teachers, and even families throughout the day. And so we wanted to have what we call a holistic approach, not only serving students throughout the day, but also in the after school programs, and also building that support and the capacity and training for some of our families. It is something that we kept hearing from families for additional support and training for families so that they can in turn support students academically and in terms of their social, emotional, behavioral needs as well.
Yeah, and we're seeing, the impacts of trying to transition from remote learning to in-person. I know New Britain Public Schools having a big problem right now, if you've been up on the news with that. Let's talk logistically with COVID right now. You all came out early on than a lot of the districts and even the state and said that you would be requiring kids to wear masks. How is that going so far?
We do not have an issue with the masks. I am so proud of our students and our staff and our families around the masks. We did communicate early on what our safety protocols. We just had 4 changes actually from the year before. One, as we all know, students are returning to full in-person learning. Our vaccinated staff and students do not need to quarantine if they're asymptomatic. And the change in the definition of close contact, which is within 3 feet as per CDC guidance. And the last change for us is that we now shifted to allowing visitors, including our parents, our caregivers, and our community partners to come into our schools throughout the day.
Are you seeing COVID cases? Are they spiking? Are they high? Or are they low?
We are seeing COVID cases. So we have about 17,200 students, just for context. We've had 183 student cases and about 3,300 staff members and 51 cases. We are fortunate that we led early on with for example, our vaccination clinics and staff. I provided staff the opportunity for vaccination. 91% of our teachers are vaccinated, and around 84% of all of our staff are vaccinated as well.
We only have a minute left, but I want to just ask you quickly about contract negotiations. We know that unions were rallying last week, saying that they feel like they're overworked, that they're underpaid. These contract negotiations for not only teachers as well as staff coming up. So I just wanted to get your take. They say they're tired and they're overworked.
This is an unprecedented, challenging time. So last 18 months, we're still not fully out of the pandemic. And so I acknowledge we deeply care about our teachers, our students, and our staff. And we are entering negotiations. The teacher's contract has not expired. It expires in 2022. However, we do enter negotiations next week, next month. And so with all of the other bargaining units, if there has been an opportunity for us to come to the table, we come to the table. And so we continue to work in partnership. We have regular communication and meetings with all of our bargaining units. And yes, I acknowledge that it has been an extraordinarily challenging time for all of us. We are deeply committed and will continue to support our staff, our students, and our families.
Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez, thank you so much for giving us an update on The Real Story. Come back in a couple months and talk to us again.
Thank you. I will.
Well, coming up on The Real Story, booster shots now available for some here in Connecticut. Who can get a 3rd shot of Pfizer and what the outlook is for other boosters? We talked with Dr. Albert Coe from Yale's School of Public Health last week, and we're bringing him back to break that down. Plus, what we know about COVID in vaccinated individuals and what we know about those who are also unvaccinated. He's going to join us right after the break.